Welcome into Carps Corner, and as always, NFL is cruising along here. College football is getting back in full swing as training camps just really opened up across the college football landscapes. There's so much to talk about. We don't have to speculate on things that are going on anymore and stuff that really doesn't matter. We got some news out of the NFL, some suspensions, some things handed down, some things being appealed. We got some news out of college football as far as what's going to happen with transfer windows and unlimited transfers and where that ultimately stands. And then also some news out of Ohio State training camp and how things are kind of looking early on, as that's going to continue to progress here throughout the next couple of weeks. So what we'll start off with here, Dolphins, they're penalized heavily. Both Dan Ross and their minority owner for the tampering process with Tom Brady and Sean Payton. They're penalized the first round pick in 2023 and the third round pick in 2024. Sounds pretty severe. They said they did not actually participate in the tanking, or that never really occurred, but they did ultimately say that what they were trying to do with luring of Tom Brady and luring of Sean Payton was highly inappropriate, and the illusion that, you know what, they're going to potentially give Tom Brady some ownership stake while he was still in New England. This going all the way back to 2019. I think that in and of itself right there is what makes this very unique. I think people realize that, hey, after he left Tampa, he had the retirement. Did he really want to retire? Did he not? Was it about Bruce Arians? Maybe it was some. Maybe it was him trying to get to Tampa. Bruce Arians came out and said he's only playing for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He will not be playing for anyone else, and didn't allow him to force his hand. So there's a lot of stuff to digest, but I think the main revelation that came out of that, as we sit here and look at it a couple of days later, is the fact that this goes all the way back to 2019, and the fact that Miami was trying to court him within the division at that point in time. And it's kind of stunning to think, like, going all the way back then with the hiring of Brian Flores and everything that went on, that could have went back that far. And so that is why they're ultimately hammered. Now they're going to have their owners meetings coming up this week. And believe me, Roger Goodell is going to lay in to all 32 franchises about tampering and about tanking and making sure these things aren't blatant. Now, it's tough in the NFL to prove tanking. Coaches, I believe, always are going out and trying to win. However, the front office, they understand where they're at some years. Some years they're in a better situation to win than others. Other years, you know what? They look like, hey, we're going to have to look to the future. We'll shed off some assets, get in a good cap position, because really now in football and in all pro sports, but especially football and even NBA, heck, it's everyone. You either want to be really good or really bad. There's nowhere in the middle that you really want to be, unless you're trying to save your job as a coach and a front office to your owner. So that, in that case, you'd rather be 9-8 than 6-11. But generally, you want to be on the bad side of that, because the only way to get better is by building assets and by getting draft equity. And so you trade away some of your players, trade back in the draft, stink for a couple years. Your guys are playing hard, and that's true. Coaches are coaching hard, and that's true. But ultimately, the front office, they're not really trying to win. And so I guarantee you Roger Goodell is going to have a piece to say to the owners. The owners probably don't care. And Goodell's done a pretty good enough job that his job's not in jeopardy. He feels protected. But ultimately as well, there's going to be some issues and some things that come up from this. So with that being said, the first round pick, the third round pick, pretty interesting ultimately to see. Something that I didn't think would ultimately occur, but that's where they're at right now with the Dolphins. And they got handed down some pretty significant penalties if you think about what has happened and where everybody's at in the league and what has been done before. And, with that, given Tom Brady his age, turning 45 years old here in early August, saw a stat come across. Pretty interesting. The fact that Tom Brady apparently is older than 13 of the 32 head coaches in the NFL. Now, that's pretty darn impressive for a guy, obviously, who's the oldest starting quarterback in NFL history, most accomplished player in NFL history. But I think that really goes to show where the league is as well. There was a time where guys under the age of 40 didn't get head jobs in the NFL, under the age of 45. And now there's this huge youth movement, this huge swing to get younger, younger, younger. And with that, Tom Brady continues to get older and older and older. And so now he sits there and looks around. 13 coaches of the 32. I mean, a third of those coaches, getting close to 50%, probably around 40%, are younger than Tom Brady. So I thought that was an interesting stat. There's something to throw out there. Pretty interesting as well when you start looking at that. The big news in the NFL, don't want to bury the lead. The NFL is appealing the ruling of Judge Sue L. Robinson in the Tom Brady case. Now, she handed down the 6-game suspension, no additional fine. She ruled on the side of the NFL. She said Deshaun Watson's actions were egregious. She understood everything that had happened, but she said this fell into like the nonviolent sexual assault, sexual harassment category, not necessarily something that involved physical violence. Now, she said, so she ruled on that with a precedent of 6 games because that had kind of been what it had been handed down prior. And I know people have pointed out, Zeke, what happened with him, the Ben Roethlisberger situation, which, he appealed and got it down to 4, which to my knowledge, was basically raping a woman in a bathroom. And so you can decide for yourself. I'm not going to be the arbitrator on that, on which is worse, with what Deshaun Watson allegedly did with a multitude of women, or what Ben Roethlisberger allegedly did with one. So there's a lot there, but she ultimately ruled on that and ruled for 6 games. So here's what the NFL did. They had 3 days to appeal. They took about 2/3 of the time and chose to appeal. And with that, it gets thrown back into Roger Goodell's court. So Roger Goodell could hear the appeal from the NFL. So essentially, he's hearing it from himself. His own people are going to be petitioning him for his appeal and what they ultimately want to see. So that could be going on one way. But he chose another path. He chose to go with Peter C. Harvey, former New Jersey Attorney General, who has worked with the league in their diversity platform and some social elements that they've done. He works at a big law firm that they employ. So there is the appearance now of someone who is going to be impartial and someone who's going to be balanced and be able to weigh in on both sides. However, he's paid by the NFL. And so the NFL didn't want to fully own this. They didn't like the 6 games. They set forth a path with the players to have an independent arbiter to go forward with this. They jointly picked someone who was a federal district court judge. The NFL didn't want to hear what she had to say. They didn't like it. They didn't think it was severe enough. She accused them of ruling and wanting to increase penalties based upon the temperature in the room. And in doing so, I think that that's wholly unfair to the player. And she agreed with that. A lot of people do. You can't change it on the fly. If you want to go back and meet with the players and figure out a new penalty structure and put that forth for the personal conduct policy, go ahead. You can do that, but you can't simply sit here and say, well, this is really bad and people think it's really bad. We think it's worse than it was before. And believe me, no 2 circumstances are alike, but you can't just go and change things. And so people will point to the number of allegations and all this other stuff. And I get all that. But you still have to go forward and try to build some sort of platform of how this works. That's how the U.S. justice system works. That's how the U.S. legal system operates, is they have different degrees of penalty based upon what you're alleged to have done. And that's what you are ultimately charged with. And that's how the NFL should be operating, if they should be in this business at all. Frankly, I don't know if employers should be in the business of handing down behavior that isn't criminally liable and civilly doesn't get in the way of them doing their job, but that's neither here nor there. If the NFL is getting into this realm, they'd better make sure they know what they're doing. They'd better make sure that they have a pretty good opportunity to do it and to stay impartial with it. So with that, as we see here, Peter C. Harvey, the New Jersey Attorney General, is going to be hearing this. Now, the NFL, reportedly wanted a year-long suspension before. It was reported that they maybe would have settled for 12 games with a steep financial penalty. I'm not sure if they're going to push for a full season long of games. Now, Dan Graziano, who works for ESPN, said they want an indefinite suspension so they don't get egg on their face. So in case more allegations come out, they look like they were able to vet everything. Here's the reality. There could be allegations that come out 2 years from now from this. Was he supposed to sit around the whole time? And so I don't know how you're supposed to wait for these allegations to occur. You rule on what you have. If more stuff comes up, you rule again. This isn't a double jeopardy thing with the court that he was already dealt with. If there's more stuff that ultimately arises that nobody knew about, then I understand where you go back and re-adjudicate it. That makes sense. But you can't just throw an indefinite suspension out there waiting as if you're waiting for something that may or may not come. It's utterly ridiculous. And so by putting Peter C. Harvey, the former New Jersey Attorney General, on this, I guess that's supposed to make it look as if, we've got someone who's more impartial on this, who's non-biased. But in the reality, he's going to do the will of the league. The NFL is trying to push this off, and this is Albert Breer. I'll throw this up. So the NFL Commissioner, Roger Goodell, wanted to pick someone outside the league office to hear Watson's appeal with what Pro Football Talk said. Why? And here's his opinion. Gives the NFL a better shot of avoiding court, and it maintains the integrity of the process negotiated with the PA. But here's the problem. The PA never jointly agreed upon Peter C. Harvey. Maybe they think that he'll be good. Maybe he won't. I don't know. But they did jointly agree on Sue L. Robinson. Maybe they should just have a panel or a number of people that they jointly agree upon, a pool, if you will, and they can go to that pool of 3 to 5 people. You work with one, you don't like it, you can appeal it, and the next person out of the hopper comes out and takes care of it. That would probably be the easiest situation. But they don't want this in federal court, and I don't think the players have a great chance of winning in federal court. If they can get it there, ultimately they would love to begin to calling up Robert Kraft, Jerry Jones, Dan Snyder, all these other owners who have all this stuff that's in these allegations that have been thrown against them. And what have their penalties been? Significantly less severe. So that's what we're looking at here. And this is what the players are ultimately trying to fight for. We'll put that away here for a little bit. You got to forgive me. Got a sore throat. Got a lot of stuff going on this week. It's been a rough one after my birthday. All right. And so lastly, we'll leave with this. It's college football news. The transfer portal and transfer portal windows and the limitless transfers are reportedly going to be punted. They're not going to be held by the committee. Now, here's the deal. I love the transfer window idea for the portal. I think that that's needed. 4 to 6 weeks after the season, 4 to 6 weeks after spring ball, maybe even 2 to 3 weeks. Figure it out. You hop in, you can hop out. Teams can maintain the roster balance. Players aren't in there in purgatory forever. If they can go back to their current place, great. If they can't, they move on. The unlimited transfers piece, I do not like at all. Limitless transfers without having to sit out. I think you should get one. Because if you get one, you're going to be more judicious with it. We want to make sure that we're teaching young men that there are consequences to all your actions. So you choose a school, you don't like it, it doesn't work out, yeah, you can go somewhere else. But the reality is, too, the grass isn't always greener. It's going to be tough everywhere. There's going to be difficult circumstances everywhere. And you'll never learn to grow through those opportunities unless you have to push through them. I referenced Terry McLaurin at Ohio State, 5-year player, Mr. Football at Indiana. Doesn't really even play till his senior year, 5th year. Has more catches than he does the previous 3-4 years. All of a sudden goes to the NFL, has a good senior year, 3rd-round pick. Goes to the Washington Commanders, gets drafted, just signed a huge deal, and everything's working out for him. And he's like, if I would have transferred, I probably would have never been as successful as I am. Now, he's a success story. Some people probably should transfer. You see people transfer in players and transfer again, and ultimately they end up with no degree. They haven't learned anything. They haven't developed any skills. They've never really built any connections, and then they're just washed out. And so sometimes you have to protect people from themselves a little bit. So the limitless transfer sounds great, sounds good in theory, but nowhere does that exist in real life unless you're willing to just sign a bevy of 1-year contracts in professional sports. And nobody really wants to do that. There are guys that can, but only the best would be willing to bet on themselves year after year after year. So I don't like that at all. Moving on to some Ohio State stuff. Opened up camp on Thursday, August 4th. Couple days, obviously, acclimation just up top. But Ryan Day has hammered one thing. He's talked about toughness. Running the ball, stopping the run. And people have asked questions about that. He's going to make this camp tough. He's going to make it hard. He's trying to simulate the longevity of the season. I know they've started to use a number of tight ends. They like a lot of the guys that they have there. Stover, Royer, G. Scott. I love what I was seeing out of those guys Thursday. CJ Stroud looks really good, but defensively, once the pads get on, this is where Ohio State's going to ultimately have to work. And it's, can you go get yards when the defense knows you need to get yards? And can you stop the run? As we watched last year, there was multiple examples. Oregon, heck, Minnesota at times, Muhammad Ibrahim. In week 1, you look at Michigan, multiple times throughout the rest of the year that it happened as well. And then ultimately it happened some with Utah. And they're finally able to get that buttoned up a little bit in the second half. But those are some of the unique things that this team has to worry about. They're going to be able to score tons of points. The receivers are great. But that's what I'm going to have my eye on here as training camp ensues. And as soon as they get pads on and start to really light it up, how tough are these players ultimately going to be? Ryan Day's a quarterback. A lot of head coaches are quarterbacks. But with that, they also want to instill the brain of toughness that when teams know you need to get a yard, you don't have to get in 4 wides, spread it out and throw it or run some sort of quick screen or something like that. That's all part of it. And there will be times for that. But also when you need a yard on the goal line or in short yardage, you want to be able to line up when you have a big physical offensive line and hammer people for a yard. You've got an elite running back, Trayvon Henderson. You want to make sure that you're able to use Travion and these guys and get these big offensive linemen and get going downhill. Last year, that was a bit of an issue. With Justin Fry, their new offensive line coach, they've changed it up a little bit. I feel like they're in a much better position, much better situation to do it. And so that is what they're going to be focusing on. And Ryan will craft situations, sculpt situations where that's going to be very tough to do. Ohio State's got a good defensive line. Linebackers who are more experienced now. They've got Steel Chambers, Tommy Eichenberg, going to be rolling Cody Simon through there. They've got some guys that are physical pieces who have a year of experience now under their belt, and that's going to help them immensely. So they've got to be on the other side of that other side, and be willing to develop that toughness, that attitude, that edge. I think the secondary is going to be good. They have 3 really good corners. The safeties will continue to progress and come along. Josh Proctor is going to be good. They're going to be, Ronnie Hickman's going to be good. You sit there and stare at them. They're 14 and 41. I feel like I'm going dyslexic looking back and forth at those 2 guys on the field. May screw with the quarterbacks a little bit, but it's going to come down to the front 7 because that was the main issue last year. You can figure out ways to stop the pass. You can move things around. You can get creative, but ultimately you can only commit so many guys to the run. And so you have to be able to get it done up front. And that is what they're going to be working on. That is going to be the central focus of this Ohio State training camp, of trying to work through some of these things, trying to continue to go out there and make sure that they can develop that toughness and work through it. So as soon as the pads come on here this weekend, that's going to be something that I'll continue to watch, continue to evaluate to make sure that they're developing the type of toughness that will be needed, the type of run style. It's not just a physically tough thing. It's assignment sound football, knowing where to be, trusting that the guys around you are going to ultimately be in their position, in their place as well, and that you can just do your job. They say do your 111th, and everybody else will do their 111th, and that is how stopping the run ultimately happens. Because if not, you start trying to do other people's jobs, it doesn't really work out. So as we get the pads on this weekend, it's going to be fun to sit and watch and see how that ultimately progresses and see where that ultimately goes. We'll be getting some regular updates. These are going to be a little more Buckeye heavy as we continue to move through. But thank you for the time. Appreciate you tuning into Carps Corner. Continue to like, comment. If there's questions on stuff, get it out there. I'll answer it for you, especially now with Buckeye training camp in full swing. It's going to be heavy, heavy football, heavy, heavy Buckeye. And I'll get as much information out to you as I can. So like, subscribe, comment, everything out there. Thank you for listening. And let's talk soon.